are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Hello, welcome, hello, and welcome again. Hi, Jeremy.
Welcome back, everyone. Hi, Julia.
Yeah, we're keeping on our roll, recording shows, and here with you, our Sobs Not Snobs community. And boy, it's fun to kind of finally be entering a category such as historical beer, right? Historical beer styles are often those that are resurrected. So if you read the BJCP, Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines that Jeremy and I take you through, the 2021 guidelines, style by style, when you get to the historical ones, many of them, the way they're descripted, I'm making up words now, the way they are described, are based on the resurrection of these historic styles, right? Some are just true to the way they were, but we are now here to talk about Kentucky Common. And I would say that the the notion of what we are doing today and reviewing these guidelines is about the pure nature of the style that's been resurrected, not maybe potentially the original iterations of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This one is kind of fun because, this is a beer a lot of us have heard about. Some of us have tasted, but it kind of exists in this mythical world of like, this is something we used to have and we're trying to recreate it. But there's a bit of discussion out there that is this true to the style? Is this true to what it used to be? Kind of like the story of Dogfish Head recreating an ancient Sumerian beer recipe long ago, and it's like, great, we have this new version of it, but what was it really like? And there's really no way to tell. So we're going off of documents, we're going off of journals, we're going off of just kind of what we can read, but it's still kind of fun to kind of bring the dodo back, if you know what I mean, with this beer style. So we'll dive into it.
Yeah, and I would love to add too, because you're going to take us to ingredients, that
Yeah.
there's a little bit of credit here for Apocalypse Brew Works, which I personally visited. The owner, Leah, who's very engaged with Beer Judge Certification Program judging and really kind of one of the pioneers that brought this style to the style guidelines in the proper way, has dug in, and she's in the mecca of Louisville, Kentucky, in the area that really helped bring the style to be. So credit due where credit should be. And I just wanted to give a nod to Leah and encourage everyone listening. If you're in that area, please do visit Apocalypse Brew Works. It's a sweet, cute little tap room, and Kentucky Common's what they hang their hat on.
Yeah. Cheers to Leah and Apocalypse. Now this is kind of interesting from an ingredient standpoint. So, before we dive into the list, let's just kind of go back into the story time. Many years ago, when we had brewers immigrating to America, thinking, "Hey, let's brew our beer here," and they realized, well, we don't have access to the same ingredients. We have to use what is available and do the best we can with what we've got. And any of you know that if you look up DIY attitude, there'll be a picture of a brewer, right? And so a lot of the beers that came out of that, American Lager is one of those main examples that came out with, we want to try and brew our German type of Pilsner, but we have 6-row malt, not 2-row malt. And there's a difference between that. I'm not going to get into the details now. We can talk about that in a prep episode and go back to our existing prep episode of ingredients. But with this beer style coming out with American lagers, 6-row is what was available, and corn and rice and that sort of thing. Well, Kentucky Common kind of follows that riff. They're using the grist ingredient, or the ingredient list. The grist is still using 6-row barley malt. They're still using corn in the form of corn grits, or coarse cornflakes or like dry polenta type of things. They can also use a little bit of a caramel malt, maybe just a touch of black malt to give a little color, a little bit of flavor. This is kind of interesting. The BJCP lists rustic American bittering hops. To me, that kind of harkens back to before Cascades even got popular, before pine tree and grapefruit zest was the flavor of American craft. We're kind of going back into kind of woodiness, flavors, even like a California Commons or steam beers. We're using a Northern Brewer that had this like lumber, woody, minty kind of flavors. To me, that's American rustic. The other thing that I noted here too is that they're using continental hops, or likely German noble hops, maybe some British, but they're using continental hops as kind of like a finishing. You kind of get a little pop of flavor. They note the water there is probably what Kentucky is known for. I don't know this firsthand, but having a kind of a high carbonate water, that high carbonate is likely to make that malt kind of step forward in the flavor stage. And then, of course, we need to ferment this sucker. This is an ale yeast. I'm not sure if people have experimented with hybridizing with lager yeast or ale yeast. What I am aware of, from what I've read, is that this is a straight up ale. Do you know anything different on that?
No, and
vein of thought?
you'd want to do an audit of historical recipes to really track that down, but I have never in my orbit heard lager yeast influencing this style.
Yeah, neither have I. But then again, these are hard to find beers, and so I'm going to claim I have a little bit of a fair amount of awareness of this beer style. But there are those who have expertise, and like Leah from Apocalypse, we should talk with her. But let's talk about Julia. Tell us what this beer should look like if we're going to try and brew it at home.
It's gonna look like a typical brown ale, right? Think English brown, American brown. It's
Mm,
amber to orange, all the way to brown in color,
yeah,
and it could be and should be clear. They allow for in the style guidelines a light haze. I really like that, especially because it means you're stripping less out of it. Sometimes a haze means good. You don't want it junked up and muddy, but should be clear or a little bit haze is okay. And then collar foam is not necessarily long lasting. I think that's interesting, especially with the 6-row barley, which is higher protein content. So that one's
yeah.
a curiosity to me a little bit. And usually white or beige in color. The collar foam on any of your beers, and y'all, if you do your beer studies, probably know this, but it's worth mentioning. The more specialty malts you tend to use, and especially if you used unroasted malted barley, that's going to color your collar of foam. So that's just kind of a tip. So it just depends on which specialty malts were used. Those kind of brown malt flavors that aren't lighter kilned based fermentable malts, but more so the specialty roasted malts that would bring the collar of foam to a darker color.
Yeah, when we get to aroma, because of those ingredients, we're looking for a kind of low to moderate, kind of grainy American sweet malt flavor. We are going to have some corn in there too, but corn doesn't tend to add a lot of flavor. I notice corn more in what I call the negative space of flavor. It just kind of cleans it out. It kind of not thins it out, but it's just a very clean, noticeable lack of smack you in the nose maltiness that you can taste in other beers like that too. It's kind of hard to describe, but trust me, go out and taste it, and you'll kind of get a sense of it. But because they are using a little bit of roasted malt, a little bit of caramel malt, we are looking for a little bit of toastiness, a low toastiness, a low bread crustiness, maybe a light caramel. It shouldn't be roasty. It shouldn't be burnt because it is brown. It is meant to be an easy drinking beer, but you can start getting senses of flavor and color coming out of that. But all of that coming through again. I'm sorry, everyone. I keep crossing over aroma and flavor because that's kind of the same thing. Um, uh, and so forgive me for using the word flavor. I'm talking about aroma, but this all kind of comes through in the aroma as well. But there's a correlation between color and flavor and color and aroma. And that's kind of what I'm really trying to hone in on. When we move that malt aside and really start focusing on what the hops have to say, we're looking at a medium low to moderate hop floral, spicy, and because of the rustic American hops, a little bit of woodiness too is what I'm expecting. What I would look for. And with all this fermentation, we can look for a little bit of light esters. It is an ale after all, but because they are using a 6-row barley, you know, we can be on the lookout for little sulfur notes like DMS, depending on how they brew it. That a little bit of that kind of comes to the territory with 6-row malt. So so kind of have a little bit of grace if you notice something not quite perfect with this. But this beer should never be sour. It should never be funky. It should never be sulfuric. And this is kind of what I'm looking for when it comes to aroma. How does that translate over to flavor? Even though I think I stepped on your toes once again on this one, Julia.
Aroma leads to flavor.
Yeah.
And first of all, the visual appearance gets our mind peaked, our palate's ready, our mouth watering. Then you think you smell before you taste. That just really
Yeah.
warms up the synapses. So it all falls into then flavor. So it's a perfect laddering and order of events. The flavor is a carryover, that moderately malty level. The guidelines talk about moderate grainy sweet maltiness with low medium caramel, toffee, bready, biscuit notes. So you're already getting indications of that in the aroma. And this beer is a dry beer, though. So you might get a hint and essence in the mid taste, particularly, but it should finish dry. That's really important. And if I were judging this, I'd be looking for that dry finish. You're not looking for sourness. The historical reference of these guidelines definitely address that. So you're not looking for any lactic sour. How Jeremy described the hop aroma really does follow to medium to low floral or spicy hop flavor. I'll also note, and I haven't looked at recipes for this, but cluster hops are a generally widely grown hop throughout the, at least United States, in North America. So cluster could be another aspect that was maybe used in the original creations of this. And cluster is supposed to be in the background more as a bittering hop. If you use it as a flavor hop, it will advance to different fruity flavors. But we're also looking for medium to low bitterness, which you wouldn't get in the aroma. That bitterness is going to kind of help balance and lessen the residual sugar, which gives us that, balance towards the malt, but not too sugary and more towards dry. And then the guidelines also talk about a flinty or minerally sulfate flavor based on the water profile. So this is a great example where if you're brewing beers or you're tasting beers, just like wine, you're looking for that terroir or that intentional water profile. Water is one of the most important ingredients in beer. 90% of beer is water. And it's so often that and carbon dioxide don't get mentioned as ingredients. So in this flavor profile for Kentucky Common and the style, the water is going to influence the what is displayed in a very noticeable way, or at least it should be. So you're kind of looking for this sessionable beer that is malt focused. And the last thing I didn't mention is that addition of corn. The notion of maize maybe helps your brain get into the trigger of like what it tastes like. You could taste some of the international lagers as an example, and some use the adjunct of corn, some use the adjunct of rice. It's a great exercise to try that. And the ones with rice have a drier snap, and they don't have really any influence, in my view, from the fermentable adjunct.
Yeah.
But the ones with corn have this advanced maize flavor that actually lend a layer of complexity. So you're looking for that base note of like tortilla chips in the background, but don't let me skew you. It shouldn't taste like a tortilla chip, but you're looking for hints of that. That's the best way I can describe that maize or corn flavor addition to this style.
Well, and you bring up a really good point that doesn't completely challenge what I mentioned before, but let's kind of qualify that. Yes, if we're brewing something with rice, it adds like no flavor. It's almost like a mouthfeel. It's almost kind of like the absence of mouthfeel with rice. With corn, there is a little bit more flavor. There is a little bit more, but it's just not the same as malt. And so that is one of those things that if you can taste a beer and say, oh, this is rice, that was corn, hats off to you. That is impressive. That is a very sensitive palate. And a good example to play with is a lot of these quote unquote Japanese lagers or rice lagers that are coming out now. You can really get a sense of that dryness. That's a really interesting point that you bring up, Julia. But on that, that what a great segue. Let's talk about mouthfeel. With back in Kentucky common land, uh, because of these ingredients, because of these caramel malts, we are looking at a medium low to moderate body. It does have a little bit of heft to it, and then the texture of it can also be a little bit soft and creamy. Remember, we're using 6-row, has a significant more amount of protein than 2-row barley does, and that may translate. It may not be a particularly creamy beer, but pound for pound compared to a similar style, it is going to be a little bit more creamy. And so that's where it's kind of pay attention to some of these textural elements in the stories that it's trying to tell you. And then lastly, this is a very highly carbonated beer. It should be effervescent, should be fizzy. I don't know what the average volumes of CO2 would be if it's close to an Australian sparkling ale. I don't have the numbers, but this is meant to be a very sparkling, refreshing beer. But that's mouthfeel. This is going to be an interesting thing. Let's talk about style comparisons. What is this like compared to others?
Yeah, and it is interesting if you can get your hands on one and do kind of those vertical tastings next to companion, brother, sister, cousin, whatever styles, and taste them blind and see if you can start to dial in that you're looking for. And Jeremy just said it, a highly carbonated. I said it in flavor, drier, kind of brown malt beer, right? Like that's what we're looking for with a little hint of maize. There you
Yeah.
go. So what's described in the style guidelines, I think, is appropriate of kind of a darker colored, and I'll say flavored, not just colored, cream ale, right? It's going to have a little bit more going on and emphasizing the corn, right? So that is an important aspect. And the character of the malts can bring you to or elicit the notion of international amber lager or some darker lagers. Irish red is listed in the style guidelines, the Irish red ale. And the last one would be wacky. You would certainly, if you're in your beer studies deep enough, be able to calibrate quickly because of the yeast influence. Compare it next to a Belgian pale, right? You're not going to have those Belgian phenol and ester driven profiles as a Belgian pale would, and yet you are going to have maybe some similarities, at least in kind of the weight and the intensity of the beers next to Belgian pale ales.
Yeah. And when we get into commercial examples, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is Julia just told you where you can find an example of this. Apocalypse Brewing. I haven't been there. Julia has. She can vouch for them. We know Julia. We love Julia. She knows her stuff. So go to Apocalypse. The bad news is this is an extremely hard beer to find. I think I may have tasted one or two only because I got a hold of them at some beer competition where they're like, "Oh, we've got a Kentucky Common," and everyone just huddled around the table like, "Ooh, I want to taste! I want to taste! I
I
want to taste!"
regularly see them in BJCP competitions when I'm judging. Definitely not
Yeah,
the commercial competitions, but the BJCP ones. So homebrewers are brewing these beers.
so homebrewers are brewing these, and that's where I was going to land my plane. Thank you, because they're so hard to find commercially. The best way to go out and do it is to do it yourself. And so, all of you homebrewers, all of you soon to be or would be homebrewers, this is where you're going to taste this beer is to just go brew it yourself. So that's what I've got for commercial examples. Let's talk some numbers.
So vital statistics, we love to kind of ground ourselves with original gravity. That's really only relevant if you're brewing it or doing calculations to get other numbers. But 1044 to 1055 is a very sessionable original gravity. That's not a lot of residual sugar to ferment down. It's very reasonable. It's typical of, say, American pale ales, right, and dark lagers. That is not a big original gravity. Final gravity, though, does leave us with residual sugar. Final gravity of 1010 to 1018. If you listen to Jeremy and I, we're like a broken record, kind of above 1008 starts to get not dry and more residual sugar. And 1010 to 1018 is a big span. You get above 1015, you've definitely got a sweeter beer in front of you. And then alcohol by volume is 4 to 5.5%. That really equates with the original gravity of 1044. to 1055. So 4 to 5.5% Kentucky Common. Your brain will now pass any test you were ever asked about the ABV of this style. And then international bitterness units, more fives, right? 15 international bitterness units, and just double it to the other end of the range to 30. IBUs is 15 to 30. So it can get a little more bitter. 15 is, slightly discernible. 30 is getting certainly there. It depends on how much residual sugar. And then standard reference method is that coloring range, all the way up to 40 being, extremely dark and black. The lower numbers are the lightest. So 11 to 20, right? I mentioned in the appearance, amber to copper to brown, and that's right in there for the appearance.
And just a quick note on IBUs, when you compare this to American styles, just like if you look at them all in a row, this is going to be a little bit lighter in IBUs. American beers like pale ales and whatnot tend to be a little bit higher on the IBU scale. But this 15 to 30 IBUs, that kind of falls in line with the kind of the German styles, the Dunkels, the Helleses. That it kind of follows that Germanic IBU pattern. And so it's kind of nice to look at these from a high level view and kind of see where these little details fit into the scope of things. For those of you who live outside of the U.S. are using European Brewery Convention for the color, we're looking at 22 to 40. For those of you who are using Plato, original Plato is going to be in the ballpark of 11 to 13 and a half. Final Plato is going to be about 2.5 to 4.5. And so that's where we can translate everything else out. But I'll take us into glassware and temp now, because this is this really is one of the few beer styles that is uniquely and solely American. A lot of the beer styles that we Americans love to share with the world, we got from Europe, and then we made them our own, and then we handed them back to you and say, check out what I made. This one is uniquely American. This is one of the few styles that is uniquely American. So that being said, I would expect this to arrive on my table in a pint glass, a shaker pint glass. If it were up to me, if I could choose, I would take this in a Willie Becker over a pint glass any day. But American is as American does. I would expect a shaker pint, hopefully a little bit better. Temperature wise, it's highly effervescent. I want it on the colder end of the spectrum. Certainly not refrigerator temperatures. Certainly not from the bottom of the cooler. But I would like this a little bit chilled, and then I'm going to warm it up in my hand. So from the standpoint of things, I want this 40 to 42 degrees. So it's well chilled, but it's not ice cold. I do not want this beer ice cold. In terms of Celsius, I'm looking at a ballpark of 6-7 degrees Celsius. Again, I want it chilled, but not ice cold. More importantly, Julia, what would you eat with this? What would you pair with this?
I love doing research in advance of shows, and there's a Louisville Ale Trail, right? So that's kind of fun. If you're in the area of Kentucky, definitely check that out. Don't just drink the bourbons, which I definitely did. But check out the beers in Louisville, and the post for the website that promotes that ale trail has I think some great pairings from Michael Moeller. So credit to Michael. And we shouldn't always just go with our own Rolodex. We should learn from others. And I love what Michael's pointing out. And it's American fare through and through. He goes straight for charcuterie, right? The meats emphasizing prosciutto, salami, smoked sausage. That's going to kind of bridge and marry into the brown malts. Forgive for the vegetarians, but blame it on Michael on that one. And then soft pretzels, right? You've got this just kind of classic malt is so synergistic with things that are baked. And soft pretzels have that incredible baked exterior, and then the inside is doughy. It would fall into a Kentucky Common, and the Kentucky Common is supposed to be refreshing. I could see it cleansing the palate and getting it ready for the next bite after you had your, bite by sip, pretzel to beer. He talks about barbecued ribs. That's a no-brainer. The kind of caramelized flavor, the smokiness, right? You could influence this with smoke. I love that idea for what this beer is about. And then something as simple as roasted chicken. Lastly, he's got bread pudding. Yay. Totally love that suggestion.
Yeah.
Warm, comforting, right? Custard texture like. And then apple crisp. I could see this also going very well with apple crisp or apple pie.
I think with all the caramel flavors that would come through, that would just be absolutely beautiful. I think you took it a little bit fancier than I was originally thinking. But for me, I could see this beer. When we go to a ball game or a rodeo, when we are typically going to have an American lager, this would fit that same bill, but with a little bit more color, a little bit more flavor. So I'm thinking a baseball game with a foot-long hot dog, or a backyard barbecue with a burger, or the rodeo with a brisket on a pretzel bun or something like that would just be absolutely wonderful.
I'm going to add one last pairing where if I'm drinking bourbon all day, then I'm going to have the nightcap with a Kentucky Common. That's my favorite pairing.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So to kind of cap off the style, it's hard to find. It's an extremely rare bird. So if you can find it, fantastic. You're better off brewing it. So to advocate for home brewers everywhere, brew it. Just brew it.
Brew on, sip on, and cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
and me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.